All of the changes in the watch industry have been done over a long period of time. It's an industry of subtle iteration on an existing formula. But if you look at a few pockets throughout the history of watchmaking, you recognize that there are some that are not like the others, some that absolutely changed the game forever for the industry going forward. And in this video, we're gonna be looking at exactly that, some of the most impactful watches that changed the industry forever. Now, what qualifies for being on this list is not whether or not the watch is the best of its type, nothing like that. What we're looking for here is, did the watch make an impact? Is it historically significant? Did it have lasting influence on the industry? And did watches of that genre, or maybe the industry at large, change as a byproduct of its release? Since we're trying to be objective about some of the most important watches, multiple watches per brand are absolutely applicable for this list. Also, to make this list, each one of the watches must have a modern counterpart that still exists today. You have to have staying power. If you don't have staying power to this moment, or at least have some lasting legacy that lives on today, it's gonna be harder to be able to exist on a list like this. We're looking for those watches that really made an impact and still have some remnants of it today. Now, this was one of the watches that, when we're talking about changing an industry, it absolutely did. This was the Seiko Astron. So it was Christmas Day, 1969, and this was the moment that signaled a revolutionary point in the disruption of the entire watchmaking world. And that came with the release of the Quartz Astron 35 SQ, which was under development for 10 years. Now, Quartz technology was in the works in Switzerland as well. It's not something that was just exclusive to the Japanese, but Japan's full embrace of the tech brought it aggressively to market, being the tipping point for Quartz going forward. Seiko first made a huge step with Quartz technology in a tabletop clock in 1963, the Crystal Chronometer, which went on to win prizes at the Neuchâtel Observatory competition. After the release of the Astron, Seiko opened up the floodgates to setting a worldwide standard for quartz movements. The fallout of this revolutionary advancement included simplified production, cheaper movements, and greater accuracy, all on a mass scale. Seiko famously stated in some of their classic ads that, quote, "Someday all watches will be made this way." And although it never got fully to that point, the trajectory of the mechanical watch industry was drastically changed as a result of the Astron's creation. The Swiss watch industry's employment was cut in half in just over a decade, from the early 1970s to the early to mid 1980s, with the focus shifting to quartz technology. And at this point, Seiko became one of the largest producers of watches in the world by the late 1970s, cementing its position as we know them today, one of the most influential and important brands in watchmaking. But further beyond this also was laying the framework for what we now perceive Japanese watchmaking to be, as this force to be reckoned with today. Now, for this next watch, we jump to Switzerland, but go to 2001. And this is one where I can see some people saying, really, is this one of the most important watches ever? I will argue it for a couple of reasons. This is the Ulysse Nardin Freak. Every so often, a new idea just clicks, as that was the case when the original Ulysse Nardin Freak made its debut in 2001. A high-end timepiece with no hands, no dial, not even a crown, and it looked like nothing else before it. A revolving movement featuring a gear train and escapement rotated once every hour, displaying the minutes with the train on the traditional watch's minute hand. It also happened to be the first mechanical watch to use a silicon balance wheel and escapement components, an unheard of idea at the time, rendering the watch anti-magnetic, resistant to corrosion and wear, and requiring very little lubrication. Time setting was accomplished by rotating the bezel with the help of a little flap that you had on the front side of it. And the watch was wound by turning the case back. Now, why is the Freak on this list? I think there's 3 reasons why I want to make a case for it being one of the most important watches and changing the industry forever. Number one, in 2001, this was a different time for watchmaking. We didn't see the full embrace of all of this daring, out-of-the-box type of avant-garde designs, but I think the Freak was one of the most important in establishing this idea going forward. Think about what was going on in this period. Richard Mille was just getting off the ground. F.P. Journe in the independent scene was just getting off the ground. You also had the Harry Winston Opus series, where you saw this blend of a household name in Harry Winston combining with, at the time, relatively unknown watchmakers that were just getting off the ground in the independent scene. The Freak was one of the most important watches when it came to independent creativity at high-end watchmaking. Second is this watch is undoubtedly recognizable and from a design standpoint really pushed things forward when it came to showing unconventional ways of telling the time, which has now become an artistic practice of many different brands out there today. And then finally, silicon as a material being embraced at this level of watchmaking. At the time of the release of this watch, many people were scoffing at the fact that silicon didn't have any place in watchmaking. But now what have we seen recently? We've seen a full embrace on this, not just the balance wheel, but even the escapement itself to be constructed from these components because of its ability to be constructed to the right tolerances and to the precise degree so that the movement is going to be that much more efficient. Rolex would not embrace the material unless it was ready to go to market at the scale that they're talking about with something like the Dynapulse. And now that you've seen the king of watchmaking embracing the material around a quarter century after this watch was brought to market, I think it's the final checkpoint that this was one of the most important watches to ever be unveiled in this industry's history. So we talked about the king of watchmaking. It was only a matter of time before we talked about one of their watches. And first up here, we're gonna talk about the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. So this is a watch that to me really sets the standard for all things Rolex going forward. It was the core foundational element that allowed Rolex to thrive in the years to come. I mean, it has everything that you would want for something that's going to change watchmaking. You had the name that was sticking, you had the marketing and how it was unveiled, the tech along with it, the release strategy, and just allowing the brand going forward to establish dominance. So Rolex's founder Hans Wilsdorf was on a quest for water sealing, releasing a concept watch known as the Submarine in 1922 with a screw-down bezel on the outer case. But you also had to open the case to set time and wind the watch. After 4 years of development, Rolex released the far more convenient Oyster case in 1926. This employed a lot of screw-down elements, including a case back and crown, and marked a vitally important leap forward in wristwatch design. Wilsdorf was a master of marketing, recruiting British swimmer Mercedes Gleitz to wear the watch while crossing the English Channel in 1927. In doing so, she became the first Rolex watch ambassador, but also the first watch industry ambassador in general that I can think of. Wilsdorf recognized that a more durable, water-resistant watch was going to be popular with sporting types and fans of the outdoors long before the advent of scuba diving. Rolex developed the perpetual movement and its automatic winding rotor roughly in 1931, which eliminated the need to open the crown and wind the watch when worn regularly, further reducing the chances of water damage to the movement. This watch had it all when it came to qualifying for this list. It had the marketing behind it, the brand ambassador, the water sealing and tech that came along with that, being an early pioneer of automatic winding, and creating a case that would be the formula for pretty much every other Rolex going forward. In the mid-20th century, international air travel was a novelty, and the watch industry responded with timepieces that could track multiple time zones. There were a lot of early attempts at tracking multiple time zones, including the Longines Zulu in 1925, you had the Glycine Airman in the early 1950s, as well as Patek's World Timer using the Louis Coutier module as well. With that said, it was this watch from the 1950s that changed the game for GMTs going forward and tracking multiple time zones altogether. And that watch is, of course, the Rolex GMT Master. Now, Rolex was approached by legendary US airline Pan Am to create a pilot's watch, and the result was the 1954 GMT Master reference 6542, which took the attempts of tracking digital time zones of the past and iterated for the optimal format. This included a fourth hand run on a 24-hour scale in tandem with the bidirectional rotating bezel. The 24-hour bezel was divided by half into red for day and blue into night sections and was nicknamed the Pepsi bezel by collectors. Compared to almost any other watch in history, this could be the most definitive watch of a genre. I've talked about it in a video about this piece before. If you close your eyes and think about almost any other genre or style of watch, a chronograph, there's a lot that can come to mind. A dive watch, a lot that can come to mind. But a GMT, yeah, there maybe are some watches that you can consider, but the format that we all follow or seem to have appear in our mind is probably that of the GMT Master. It became a key reference for vintage collectability. It was an early adopter also of the Jubilee bracelet. You saw military use case and a watch that is one of the pillars of Rolex's design. First launched over 40 years ago, this is a watch that has become so ubiquitous it has completely changed the game altogether. We're talking about the Casio G-Shock. This quartz digital watch is the brainchild of Casio engineer Kiko Ibe. This came to the mind of the engineer behind this piece in 1981 when his mechanical watch fell to the ground and shattered. The task force in finding a solution was known as Team Tough, and they conducted real-world testing, dropping prototypes out of a third-story window with the goal of creating digital watches that went beyond anything available at the time. Mr. Ibe, the engineer behind this, had nearly given up when he was inspired by seeing a child's rubber ball bouncing off the ground. This helped push forward the breakthrough for its secure shock-resistant case, with the team creating the DW5000C in 1983, a digital watch with a floating module that was highly impact-resistant, lightweight, and water-resistant to 200 meters. Early television commercials really set the idea about what this watch was. They used it as a hockey puck, and eventually the G-Shock became the watch of choice for extreme athletes, military, law enforcement personnel, firefighters, and anyone whose job finds them in tough conditions. The G-Shock completely revolutionized the game for watches that could withstand the extremes. And further, the watches made their way into pop culture time and time again, a go-to for actors, musicians, and those in fashion. With hundreds of millions of models that have sold to this point and high-profile limited edition collaborations available to this day, the G-Shock is unquestionable in its pantheon among the greats in watchmaking, despite it being a very attainable watch at that. And beyond all of its contributions to the extremes and what it was able to do for pop culture, it also was one of the watches responsible for hitting that tipping point of the full embrace of digital watches altogether. So now we jump back to Rolex, looking at arguably the first dedicated modern dive watch to the market, the Rolex Submariner. This watch helped the design language of highly water-resistant construction, highly legible black dials, Mercedes hands, illuminated markers, and rotating timing bezels. The sub was adopted by professional dive pioneers, including Jacques Cousteau's team, military units such as the British Ministry of Defense, commercial dive companies such as Comex, and found its way into pop culture time and time again, with probably the most famous example being Sean Connery's James Bond first wearing the 6538 in Dr. No. The Submariner is probably the single most influential watch design in history, with many watches following its visual cues and functionality almost to the letter. I am convinced that dive watches wouldn't have nearly the portion of the collecting discourse if it wasn't for this style created by the Submariner. And yes, there are other dive watches that had a similar format of that era, but it was the Submariner that really was that tipping point where you saw so many following. You also have this idea where, because it's so recognizable, we like to think that it's all associated just with the Rolex Submariner, but it's been so imitated over the years, some of the small cues about this design, that you can't escape it just by escaping the Rolex Submariner itself. You almost have to escape all of mechanical watches in general to not be reminded of this design. And we've talked about it so far. I mean, establishing Rolex as a solidified name in the sports genre was done by multiple models, but none greater than that of the Rolex Submariner. The Cartier Santos is the father of all modern sports men's wristwatches, also serving as the first pilot's watch, sports watch, and purpose-built tool watch. It was designed by Louis Cartier in 1904 for pioneering Brazilian aviator Alberto Santos Dumont, who was looking for a more convenient solution for use while flying than checking his pocket watch. The Santos transcended its roots as a pilot's watch, becoming a style breakthrough by being an early sign of what was to come with the popularization of wristwatches, becoming fashionable for men's wear. The distinctive look featured a flat, square case with rounded corners, a trademark screwed-in bezel, and that classic Cartier Roman numeral dial. I mean, this was the watch that developed the signaling of style for Cartier, one of the most important names in luxury in the 20th century. And with the groundwork being done with this styling, you were able to see other pieces adopt it, such as the tank to follow, another icon. But if we have to pick the most important watches that changed the industry forever, the Santos gets the edge because many people forget it was first a sports tool-oriented watch that just became part of casual attire and building the frameworks for one of the crown jewels of luxury in the 20th century, as mentioned. The Omega Speedmaster, a watch synonymous with space exploration, started life as a racing chronograph in 1957 as part of a trilogy of watches that included the Seamaster 300 and the Railmaster. Despite not getting enough credit in this regard, the Speedmaster was famous for being the first chronograph to put a tachometer scale on the external bezel, a now commonly accepted trait of a chronograph to this day. The Speedmaster gained acceptance among the aviation community, with airline and military pilots adopting the Speedy, including test pilots and future astronauts like Wally Schirra, who wore the first Omega in space, the CK-2998, in October of 1962. In a totally unaffiliated exercise from what Wally Schirra was wearing on his wrist, NASA officially selected the Speedmaster in 1965 as flight qualified for issue to astronauts in the rapidly accelerating space program, beating out other contenders like Rolex, Longines, Bulova, and Breitling. The Speedmaster ST-105.012 became the first watch worn on the moon on July 20th, 1969 on the wrist of Apollo 11's Buzz Aldrin, thus creating the legend of the iconic moon watch. The Speedmaster also served a key role in the safe return to Earth of the astronauts of the Apollo 13 mission, as it was used to time engine burns when all of the systems on board malfunctioned, a story now immortalized in Ron Howard's film Apollo 13. The Speedmaster remains qualified by NASA for spaceflight over 60 years later and is the only watch officially cleared for EVA or extravehicular activity, including spacewalks. The contemporary Speedmaster professional moonwatch remains the halo product for Omega, even spawning one of the biggest watch industry success stories of the last several years, the best-selling Moonswatch collaborations. A theme that you might notice throughout this video is that if you have a design that can stand the test of time, most brands will recognize it and will treat these watches with care. That is absolutely the case with the Speedmaster if you're looking at the professional Moonwatch version. The watch looks the same today as it did back then. And some people might be against this idea, thinking this is a tiring type of idea. But to me, I think this is a testament to how well this watch is designed and its lasting impact. Now, although Rolex has offered chronograph watches since the 1930s, the watch we know today as the Daytona didn't make its debut until 1963, with the 37mm reference 6239 Cosmograph, their first chrono with a tachometer scale on the bezel. The name Daytona didn't appear on the dial until 1964, with the watch utilizing a modified manual Valjoux 72 movement. And an automatic movement didn't appear until 1988, when Zenith was tapped to supply calibers that Rolex modified down to 4 Hz, with their models becoming known as the El Primero Daytonas. The Daytona didn't get its own in-house movement until 2000 with the introduction of the vertical clutch 4130, and in 2016, Rolex debuted a ceramic bezel, a proprietary formulation known as Cerachrome. Now, I'm saying all these reasons why maybe the Daytona wasn't a watch that should be considered, but if you look at more modern watchmaking and what was being done through the collectability side of things, the Daytona was unlike any other watch before it. The first sign of significant uplift came from the Italian collector community, almost single-handedly sparking interest in vintage models, especially those exotic dialed versions associated with actor Paul Newman. Newman's own watch shattered the records in 2017 when it was put up for auction by Philips, and closing at $17.75 million, pushing the modern version's desirability into the stratosphere, with them already creeping up in the years before that. The modern Rolex Daytona is the driver of demand for Rolex sports watches. It was that leading symbol to this infamous waiting list craze and all of this newfound collectability that came in the mechanical watch market. It was one of the watches that lived in a shadow for quite some time to other Rolex sports pieces, but nowadays it's one of the most coveted, and I think for that we have to say it completely changed what the industry was about in the 21st century. So we discussed many watches in the integrated sports watch craze of the 1970s, but let's be clear about things. There is one singular king that sits above the rest. That's the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. In response to demand from dealers for an upscale steel sports watch, the head of AP recruited Gerald Genta, who is rumored to have sketched the Royal Oak in one evening, including its sleek integrated bracelet design. With a price of 3,650 Swiss francs for a steel watch, the Royal Oak cost more than most automobiles of the day. But AP leaned into the high retail price in their advertising, and the gamble paid off, with the watch becoming a hit among the jet set with some work. It did leave the gates at a slower pace, as it was 3 years before 1,000 pieces from the original run of the reference 5402 were sold. But the Royal Oak paved the way for other high-end integrated sports models to follow. That included the Patek Philippe Nautilus, the Vacheron 222, and eventually the Overseas, the IWC Ingenieur, and countless others that we could mention. This watch cemented one of the most important brands, arguably the most well-known watch designer ever, and a style of watch all in one stroke of genius and foresight. More than 50 years later, demand is as high as ever for the Royal Oak. We've seen this resurgence in integrated sports genre overall in the past 5 years, and Gerald Genta has a legacy that is unlike any other watch designer before him, with his personal Royal Oak selling for more than $2 million at a Sotheby's auction. So I might get some flack for putting this on the list, but if you're talking about the 21st century, there is no other watch that can compete with our next on this list, the Apple Watch. Yes, the Apple Watch is not a piece that I would typically talk about and fall in line with the subjects on this channel. However, if we're speaking about watches that change the industry, it must be discussed in a video like this. The first Apple Watch was launched in the spring of 2015, quickly becoming the world's best-selling wearable device by a wide margin. In 2024, there were approximately 38 million units shipped of the Apple Watch. Keep in mind the total Swiss watch exports, which includes quartz and mechanical watches in 2024, were 15.3 million. Since the Apple Watch was released, Swiss watches have seen a dramatic drop in export volume, with 2014 hitting 28.6 million exports, with 20.5 being quartz pieces and the remaining 8.1 million being mechanical watches, with these figures coming from the Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult report. Now, the 2024 results of 15.3 million total exports were approximately 10 million quartz watches and 5.3 million mechanical watches making up the mix. From this data, what is very clear is that high volume brands catering to fashion forward, attainable options are getting hit the most, primarily under $1,000 as a result of the Apple Watch. However, what is also happening, and something that I think we have to thank the Apple Watch for, is that many are becoming attracted to the category of mechanical watches in ways that the Apple Watch can't compete, since there is a newfound interest in wearing objects on the wrist. In contrast, just to show an idea of this, that watches are now being focused more on the artistic side of things, and for mechanical watches in general, in 2014, the retail value in Swiss francs for the industry was 21 billion. Now it is at 24.8 billion. Now, some are clearly going to say this is inflationary, which is definitely the case too, but for an antiquated good like watches, where you're seeing production going down, you would expect this to have a negative impact even on this front. The reality of the situation is that the Apple Watch has been destructive to brands under $1,000, but not for the entire industry, as it's not catering to mechanical offerings, and it's also contributed to the rising interest overall in the category from the collector side, as people are getting more comfortable of putting something on their wrist daily and wearing it out the door. And now for our final watch on this list, we talk about Swatch. So Swatch was founded in the early 1980s, developed as Switzerland's response to the quartz crisis of the 1970s and 80s, in which inexpensive battery-powered quartz watches from Asia were competing against more established European names. The name Swatch is a contradiction of second watch, with its concept being a, quote, low-cost, high-tech, artistic, and emotional watch. These were marketed as casual, disposable accessories that leaned into quartz watchmaking head-on, a drastic difference from many of the other watches from Switzerland before it. The colorful, inexpensive watches reflected the bold aesthetic of the 1980s, with a wide variety of styles that could be coordinated with a host of different fashionable looks, leading to consumers collecting multiple swatches. Now, Lebanese entrepreneur Nicholas G. Hayek Sr., together with a group of Swiss investors, took a majority share of Swatch during 1985 in a newly consolidated group under the SMH name, later changing the name to one of the most powerful entities in the watchmaking industry, known as the Swatch Group. Now, I think there are two primary reasons behind the genius of the Swatch that I think makes it eligible for this video, and one of the standouts, honestly. There's a reason why I'm closing with this piece on this list. Number one, it was a way to get a new generation into Swiss watches, with the collectability being a tremendous value add, as a buyer didn't become just a one-timer, but someone who wanted to have multiple swatches. This eventually was enough to make many of these early collectors graduate to more serious and expensive watches in the years to come. And number two, it also disarmed the threat of quartz watchmaking from other countries, with the Swiss showing that they can play the same game. This later played into their favor as it legitimized mechanical watchmaking. which was an entirely different draw. And with the established ability of the region, Switzerland was able to reap the upsides of the growing interest in the category once again, given that it didn't fully abandon the craft like other nations such as the United States. The Swatch Group now owns more than a dozen watchmaking brands too, and it was built off the back of some of the success of Swatch. These brands include Omega, Blancpain, Hamilton, Longines, Tissot, and the powerhouse of a movement manufacturer known as Etta. Today, the Swatch brand remains iconic and the premise remains. And we saw a recent stroke of genius with the major hit with the Omega collaboration Moon Swatch, with several brightly colored versions in their bioceramic case material, as well as a collab with Blancpain in the Scuba 50 Fathoms models. Given the size of production of Swatch, this has been able to be not just a in-the-weeds type of item that certain people know, it's been able to transcend that and be a part of pop culture. And on this list, there's only a couple watches that I would say reach that tier. It'd be this watch, as well as the G-Shock mentioned earlier. And if you're in the same class as the G-Shock and having pop cultural relevance, if not even more than it, that's something to be said. But all right, guys, that is my video here today, looking at some of the most important watches that changed the industry forever. I wanted to try to draw a distinctive line on the difference between best or some of the greatest versus the most important that changed the industry. I think those are two drastically different ideas. So these are the ones to me that felt made the most sense. If these watches didn't exist, the industry would not be what it is today. But if you think that I forgot something on this list here, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you had to pick the single most important watch for the industry, let me know down there as well. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really do appreciate that, as well as checking out teddybaltasar.com. Teddybaltasar.com is an authorized dealer for all the brands that we carry, including 35 brands now on our site. Every purchase from teddybaltasar.com comes with quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the brands that we offer. Also, how we're able to continue content on this channel is through selling watches. So if you are in the market for a watch, we'd absolutely love to have your business. Let's keep doing what we're doing here. We love what we do. Guys, that's all we have for this one. Thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.